Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the exploration vessel Horizon's Edge, watching the blue and green planet grow larger on his screen. After 3 years of travel through deep space, his team had finally reached the Kepler 442 system. The planet below looked beautiful with its swirling clouds and vast oceans that reminded him of Earth. Dr. Lisa Carter moved beside him, holding her data pad filled with readings from the planet's surface. Her eyes were bright with excitement as she studied the information. She had spent most of her life dreaming of this moment when humanity would meet another intelligent species. The signals they had detected from this world 2 years ago had changed everything for the human race. Commander Rick Thompson checked his weapon systems one more time, even though Jake had told him they were coming in peace. Rick was a careful man who believed in being ready for anything. He had seen too many missions go wrong when people were not prepared. His hand rested near the communication controls that could call for help from Earth if needed. Engineer Sam Rodriguez worked at his station, making sure all the ship's systems were running perfectly. He was younger than the others, but had earned his place on this mission through his brilliant work with alien technology. Sam had a gift for understanding how things worked even when they were completely different from human designs. The ship's computer spoke in its calm voice, announcing that they were receiving a transmission from the planet. Jake felt his heart beat faster as he realized they were about to make first contact with an alien civilization. He had trained for this moment, but nothing could really prepare someone for actually meeting beings from another world. The main screen flickered and then showed the face of a creature unlike anything they had ever seen. The being had pale blue skin and large, dark eyes that seemed to look right through them. Its head was longer than a human's, and it wore what appeared to be some kind of ceremonial robes covered in strange symbols. The alien spoke in a voice that was translated by their computer systems. It said its name was High Magistrate Zeth Kovar, and it represented the Valdari people who ruled this planet called Nexora. The creature explained that they had been watching the human ship approach for several days and had decided to allow them to visit. Jake stepped forward and introduced himself and his crew. He explained that humans came in peace and hoped to learn about Valdari culture and perhaps establish friendly relations between their peoples. The words felt strange coming out of his mouth because he was talking to a being from another star system. Zeth Kovar listened carefully and then began to explain the rules that all visitors to Valdari space must follow. He spoke about something called the Code of Absolute Order, which governed every aspect of life on Nexora. The alien's voice was serious as he explained that these laws had kept their civilization stable for over 3,000 years. The High Magistrate told them that every action on Nexora was controlled by specific laws that could not be changed or questioned. He said that even the smallest violation of these rules would result in exile to their wasteland moon, where no one had ever returned alive. His dark eyes seemed to grow even darker as he spoke about the punishments. Lisa felt a chill run down her spine as she listened to the alien describe their legal system. It sounded like every part of their lives was controlled by rigid rules that left no room for mistakes or different ways of thinking. She wondered how such a civilization could have survived for so long without any flexibility. Rick's hand moved closer to his weapon controls as he heard about the harsh punishments. Something about this alien society made him nervous, even though they had not been threatened directly. He had learned to trust his instincts, and right now they were telling him to be very careful. Sam was fascinated by what he was hearing about their technology and social structure. He wanted to know how they had built such a complex civilization with such strict rules. His mind was already working on questions about their engineering and scientific achievements. Jake accepted the conditions that Zeth Kovar had outlined because he knew this was humanity's best chance to learn about an advanced alien race. He believed his crew was smart enough and careful enough to follow whatever rules the Valdari had established. After all, they were guests in this star system and should respect the local customs. The High Magistrate seemed pleased with Jake's response and gave them permission to land on Nexora. He told them that a delegation of Valdari officials would meet them at the designated landing site to begin the formal process of cultural exchange. As their ship began its descent toward the alien world, Jake felt both excitement and worry building in his chest. This mission could change the future of the human race, but it could also end in disaster if they made any serious mistakes. He looked at his crew and saw the same mixture of emotions on their faces. The surface of Nexora grew clearer. As they descended through the atmosphere, they could see vast cities with tall spires and complex geometric patterns that stretched for kilometers in every direction. The architecture was unlike anything humans had ever built, with its perfect symmetry and mathematical precision. Dr. Carter made notes about everything she could observe from their descent. She noticed that there seemed to be no variation in the building styles and no signs of the random growth that marked human cities. Everything appeared to be planned and controlled down to the smallest detail. Commander Thompson watched for any signs of military installations or weapons, but saw nothing that looked threatening. The Valdari cities seemed to be built purely for efficiency and order rather than defense. This surprised him because most civilizations he studied had clear military components. Engineer Rodriguez was amazed by the technology he could see even from their high altitude. The power distribution systems and transportation networks were far more advanced than anything humans had achieved. He wondered if the strict social order had somehow helped them reach higher levels of technological development. As the Horizon's edge touched down on the landing platform that the Valdari had designated, Jake took a deep breath and prepared to make history. He was about to become the first human to walk on an alien world and meet beings from another star. The weight of responsibility felt enormous as he realized that his actions in the coming days could determine whether humanity would gain new allies or new enemies among the stars. 3 weeks had passed since the human crew arrived on Nexora, and they had learned much about Valdari society. Jake Morrison walked through the crystal corridors of the great administrative complex alongside High Magistrate Zeth Kovar, who was explaining the finer points of their quantum processing systems. The alien's voice echoed off the smooth walls as he described how their technology maintained perfect efficiency through absolute predictability. Dr. Lisa Carter spent her days studying Valdari biology and social structures in their vast libraries. She discovered that the aliens had eliminated all forms of creative expression centuries ago because they believed such activities led to chaos and unpredictability. Music, art, and literature were considered dangerous wastes of time that could corrupt the perfect order of their society. Commander Rick Thompson had been given access to their military records and was surprised to learn that the Valdari had not fought a war in over 800 years. Their rigid social system prevented the conflicts that plagued other civilizations. However, he also noticed that individual Valdari seemed unable to make quick decisions or adapt to unexpected situations. Engineer Sam Rodriguez worked closely with Valdari technicians to understand their quantum processors that powered their entire civilization. These machines were incredibly complex and required precise maintenance to function properly. Sam was eager to help when one of the main processors in the cultural center began showing signs of malfunction. The Valdari technician named Vel Thara explained that the processor controlled the memory crystal, a sacred artifact that stored the complete history of their civilization. The crystal had been glowing dimly for several days, indicating that the quantum field generator was not working correctly. If the crystal stopped working, thousands of years of Valdari history would be lost forever. Sam examined the quantum field generator and quickly identified the problem. A small component had become misaligned, causing the entire system to operate at reduced efficiency. He knew exactly how to fix it, because human technology used similar principles, even though it was much less advanced than what the Valdari had created. Vel Thara watched nervously as Sam carefully adjusted the quantum resonance chamber. The young, Human engineer worked with steady hands, making tiny corrections to the field alignment while monitoring the energy readings on his portable scanner. The repair was going smoothly until something unexpected happened. The memory crystal suddenly flared with brilliant light as the quantum field snapped back into proper alignment. The surge of energy was much stronger than anyone had expected, and it caused Sam to stumble backward. His hand brushed against the surface of the crystal for just a moment before he regained his balance. The light in the room changed immediately as every Valdari present froze in shock. Velthara's face turned, even paler than usual, as he stared at the spot where Sam's hand had touched the sacred crystal. The other Valdari technicians began backing away from the human as if he had become dangerous. Jake arrived at the laboratory within minutes after being summoned by emergency communication. He found Sam standing alone in the center of the room, while a circle of Valdari officials surrounded him at a safe distance. High Magistrate Zeth Kovar stood among them with an expression that Jake had never seen before on the alien's face. The High Magistrate spoke in a voice filled with something that sounded like regret. He explained that Sam had committed one of the most serious crimes in Valdari society by touching the memory crystal. According to the Code of Absolute Order, any unauthorized contact with sacred objects was punishable by immediate exile to the moon, Cathera. Dr. Carter tried to explain that Sam had only been trying to help repair their equipment and had not intended to touch the crystal. She argued that it was clearly an accident that happened while he was working to save their historical records. Her words seemed to have no effect on the Valdari officials, who continued to stare at Sam with expressions of shock and pity. Commander Thompson stepped forward and demanded to speak with someone in authority about this situation. He could not believe that an entire civilization would condemn someone to death for accidentally touching an object while trying to help them. His military training had taught him that intent should matter when judging someone's actions. High Magistrate Zeth Kovar explained that intent was not a concept that existed in Valdari law. Their legal system was based on actions and consequences, not on the reasons behind those actions. He said that Sam's good intentions could not change the fact that he had violated one of their most sacred laws. Jake felt anger building inside him as he listened to the alien's explanation. He could not accept that his crew member would be sentenced to death for trying to help these people. There had to be some way to appeal this decision or find an alternative punishment that would satisfy their legal requirements. The High Magistrate seemed to understand Jake's frustration and mentioned that there was one option available under ancient Valdari law. He spoke of something called the right of advocacy, which had not been used in over 800 years. This law allowed someone to speak in defense of an accused person before the Circle of Seven judges. Jake immediately demanded to invoke this right and serve as Sam's advocate in a formal trial. High Magistrate Zeth Kovar warned him that no advocate had ever successfully defended anyone in the history of their civilization. Their laws were designed to be absolute and unbreakable, with predetermined punishments for every possible crime. The alien explained that Jake would have exactly 7 days to prepare his case before the trial began. During that time, he would be given access to their legal archives and allowed to study the Code of Absolute Order. However, he would be arguing his case before judges who had never shown mercy or flexibility in thousands of years of legal proceedings. Dr. Carter volunteered to help Jake research Valdari law and history, while Commander Thompson offered to study their cultural psychology to understand how their minds worked. Sam remained calm despite facing a death sentence, trusting that his captain would find a way to save him from exile to the wasteland moon. As they returned to their quarters that evening, Jake realized that he was facing the greatest challenge of his career. He had to find a way to defend Sam using a legal system he barely understood, in front of judges who had never changed their minds about anything. The fate of his crew member and possibly their entire mission depended on his ability to understand how these aliens thought. High Magistrate Zeth Kovar watched the humans leave with mixed emotions. He genuinely liked these visitors from Earth and respected their desire to help his people. However, the law was the law, and it had kept their civilization stable for thousands of years. He could not imagine any argument that would convince the Circle of Seven Judges to show mercy. That night, Jake sat in his quarters studying the ancient Valdari texts that contained their legal code. The laws were incredibly complex and covered every possible situation with mathematical precision. Each crime had exactly one punishment, and there seemed to be no room for interpretation or exception. As he read through case after case of perfect legal decisions, Jake began to understand the challenge he faced. The Valdari legal system was, like a giant machine that processed crimes and produced punishments without any human element of judgment or compassion. He needed to find a way to introduce concepts that had never existed in their society. Dr. Carter brought him food and coffee as he worked through the night. She had been studying Valdari psychology and believed that their entire civilization was built on fear of chaos and unpredictability. They had chosen perfect order over individual freedom and had never questioned whether this was the right choice. Commander Thompson reported that the Valdari military records showed no examples of flexible thinking or creative problem-solving. Their soldiers and officers followed orders exactly without any ability to adapt to changing circumstances. This suggested that their entire society had lost the capacity for independent thought. Sam spent his time writing letters to his family on Earth, knowing that he might never see them again. He told Jake not to blame himself if the trial went badly, because they had all known the risks when they volunteered for this mission. His calm acceptance of the situation only made Jake more determined to find a way to save him. Jake Morrison had spent 4 sleepless days buried in ancient Valdari legal texts, searching for any precedent or loophole that might save Sam Rodriguez from exile. The alien writing system had been difficult to master, but their translation devices helped him understand the complex legal language. Every law seemed designed to eliminate any possibility of interpretation or mercy. Dr. Lisa Carter worked alongside him, taking notes on Valdari psychology and social structure. She had discovered that their civilization had not always been so rigid. Thousands of years ago, their legal records showed evidence of debates, appeals, and even pardons in special circumstances. Something had happened to change their society into the perfect machine it had become. The breakthrough came when Lisa found references to the Great Chaos period in their historical archives. About 3,000 years ago, the Valdari had experienced a time of social upheaval when different groups disagreed about laws and their interpretation. Wars had broken out between cities and millions had died in conflicts that lasted for centuries. Commander Rick Thompson read the military histories from that period and learned that the Valdari had created the Code of Absolute Order to prevent future wars. They had decided that allowing any flexibility in their laws would eventually lead back to chaos and destruction. Their entire civilization was built on the fear of repeating those terrible times. Jake realized that the Valdari legal system was not really about justice, but about control and predictability. Every law was designed to eliminate uncertainty and ensure that everyone knew exactly what would happen if they broke any rule. The system worked by making people afraid to do anything that was not explicitly permitted. Sam Rodriguez continued to work on technical projects while waiting for his trial, showing no signs of fear or anger about his situation. His calm behavior impressed the Valdari technicians, who had never seen someone face exile with such dignity. Several of them privately began to question whether their laws were truly just in this case. As Jake studied more cases from Valdari legal history, he began to notice something interesting. The laws were indeed logical and consistent, but they were based on assumptions that had never been questioned. The entire system assumed that all actions could be judged without considering the reasons behind them or the circumstances that led to them. Dr. Carter helped him understand that the concept of intent was completely foreign to Valdari thinking. They had eliminated this idea from their society because they believed it led to endless arguments and subjective judgments. In their view, only actions mattered because actions could be observed and measured objectively. The more Jake learned about their system, the more he realized that it was both incredibly sophisticated and fundamentally flawed. The Valdari had created a perfect logical structure, but had forgotten that real life rarely fits into perfect logical categories. Their system could handle simple situations, but broke down when faced with complex human motivations. Commander Thompson discovered that the Valdari had actually encountered this problem before. Their legal archives contained thousands of cases where the rigid application of their laws had produced results that seemed wrong even to them. However, instead of changing their system, they had simply accepted that some injustice was the price of maintaining perfect order. Jake began to develop a strategy based on this weakness in their legal philosophy. Instead of trying to argue that Sam was innocent, he would challenge the logical foundations of their entire system. He would use their own love of logic to show them that their laws were not as perfect as they believed. The key insight came when he realized that Valdari law treated all actions as if they occurred in isolation. The system did not consider the relationship between different actions or the context in which they occurred. This created logical contradictions that the Valdari had never been forced to confront. Dr. Carter found the example that would become the center of Jake's argument. Valdari law required all citizens to help maintain their technology and infrastructure. At the same time, it forbade unauthorized contact with sacred objects. Sam had been following the first law when he violated the second law, creating a situation their legal system could not handle properly. Jake spent hours practicing his argument with his crew, knowing that he would only get one chance to present his case. He had to be careful not to attack their system directly, because that would make the judges defensive. Instead, he would use questions and logical puzzles to lead them to see the flaws themselves. Commander Thompson warned him that the Valdari judges might not be capable of the kind of flexible thinking his strategy required. Their entire society had been trained for thousands of years to avoid questioning established rules. Asking them to reconsider their fundamental beliefs might be like asking them to breathe underwater. High Magistrate Zeth Kovar visited Jake on the evening before the trial to explain what would happen the next day. The alien seemed genuinely sorry about Sam's situation, but insisted that the law must be followed regardless of personal feelings. He warned Jake that the Circle of 7 judges had never changed their minds about any legal decision. Jake asked the High Magistrate about the original purpose of their laws and why they had been created. Zeth Kovar explained that the Code of Absolute Order existed to prevent the chaos and suffering that had nearly destroyed their civilization. Every law served the greater good by maintaining stability and predictability. The conversation gave Jake another piece of his strategy. He would argue that truly serving the greater good required considering the context and intent behind actions, not just blindly following predetermined rules. A system that could exile someone for trying to help was not really protecting their society. Dr. Carter had prepared detailed psychological profiles of each judge based on their past decisions and public statements. She identified which judges might be more open to logical arguments and which ones would resist any challenge to established authority. This information would help Jake target his arguments more effectively. Sam spent his final evening writing in his personal journal about his experiences with the Valdari. He wrote that despite facing exile, he did not regret trying to help them repair their technology. He believed that taking risks to help others was one of the things that made humans special compared to other species they might encounter. The young engineer also wrote about his faith in Captain Morrison's ability to find a solution to seemingly impossible problems. Sam had seen Jake solve complex technical and diplomatic challenges before by approaching them from unexpected angles. He trusted that his captain would not give up until every option had been explored. Jake read through his notes one final time. checking every detail of the argument he would present to the Valdari judges. He knew that Sam's life depended on his ability to make these aliens question beliefs they had held for thousands of years. The challenge seemed impossible, but Jake had never accepted that anything was truly impossible. As he prepared for sleep, Jake thought about the responsibility he carried not just for Sam, but for the future relationship between humans and Valdari. If he failed tomorrow, it would not only mean Sam's death, but probably the end of any cooperation between their species. The Valdari would conclude that humans were too unpredictable and dangerous to deal with. Dr. Carter and Commander Thompson also spent the evening reviewing their roles in supporting Jake's defense. They would be allowed to provide expert testimony about human psychology and behavior. Their job was to help the judges understand concepts that had never existed in Valdari society. The three humans knew they were attempting something that had never been done before in Valdari history. They were trying to introduce ideas like mercy, context, and proportional justice to a legal system that had been designed to eliminate exactly those concepts. Success would require changing the minds of beings who had been trained never to change their minds. Outside their quarters, the alien city continued its perfectly ordered existence. Valdari citizens followed their daily routines with mechanical precision, unaware that tomorrow's trial might change the foundation of their entire civilization. The outcome would determine whether their society could learn to accept new ideas or would remain frozen in its ancient patterns forever. The Great Hall of Justice stood like a monument to Valdari civilization with its perfect geometric design and walls covered in carved legal symbols. Jake Morrison walked through the massive doors, feeling the weight of history and responsibility pressing down on him. Behind him, Sam Rodriguez moved with quiet dignity despite the chains that marked him as an accused criminal. The circle of 7 judges sat on raised platforms arranged in a precise semicircle around the center of the hall. Each judge wore robes of deep blue covered with golden symbols representing different aspects of Valdari law. Their pale faces showed no emotion as they watched the humans enter their sacred space of justice. High Magistrate Zeth Kovar took his position at the center of the judicial circle, serving as the chief judge for this unprecedented trial. His dark eyes reflected thousands of years of legal tradition as he called the court to session using words that had been spoken in this hall for countless generations. Prosecutor Neth Valar stood opposite Jake, her tall form wrapped in robes of pure white that marked her as a speaker for absolute law. She had prosecuted legal cases for over 2 centuries and had never lost a single trial. Her reputation for logical precision and ruthless application of legal principles was known throughout Valdari space. Dr. Lisa Carter and Commander Rick Thompson sat in the designated area for expert witnesses, ready to provide testimony when called upon. They had studied Valdari court procedures and knew that their role would be crucial in helping the judges understand human concepts that had no equivalent in alien law. The trial began with Prosecutor Neth Valar presenting the case against Sam Rodriguez. She spoke in the measured tones that Valdari legal tradition demanded, laying out the facts with mathematical precision. Sam had touched the memory crystal while it was in an active state, violating the sacred law that protected their most important historical artifact. Neth Valar presented evidence from multiple witnesses who had seen Sam's hand make contact with the crystal surface. She showed recordings from security devices that captured the exact moment of violation. The prosecutor argued that the facts were clear and undisputed, making the required punishment equally clear and undisputed. The alien. Prosecutor explained that the law protecting sacred objects existed to preserve Valdari civilization from chaos and destruction. She said that allowing any violation to go unpunished would undermine the entire legal system that had kept their society stable for 3,000 years. The law had to be applied equally to all beings, regardless of their intentions or circumstances. Jake rose to present his defense, knowing that he was about to challenge legal principles that had never been questioned in Valdari history. He began by acknowledging the facts that the prosecutor had presented, admitting that Sam had indeed touched the memory crystal during the repair process. However, Jake then did something that stunned everyone in the courtroom. Instead of arguing that Sam was innocent, he began to question the logical foundation of the law itself. He asked the judges to consider whether a truly logical legal system could ignore the context and circumstances surrounding an action. Jake presented his first logical puzzle to the court. He described a hypothetical situation where a Valdari citizen was required by law to maintain a piece of equipment, but that same equipment was classified as a sacred object that could not be touched. He asked the judges how their legal system would handle this contradiction. The judges looked uncomfortable as they realized they had never considered such a situation. Judge Colveran, the eldest member of the circle, spoke for the first time in the trial. He said that their legal system did not contain contradictions because it had been perfected over thousands of years of careful development. Jake respectfully disagreed and presented evidence from their own legal archives. He had found dozens of cases where Valdari citizens had been caught between conflicting laws, forced to violate one rule in order to follow another. In each case, the courts had simply chosen to prosecute under whichever law seemed more serious. Dr. Carter was called to provide expert testimony about human psychology and the concept of intent. She explained that humans naturally considered the reasons behind actions when making moral judgments. She argued that ignoring intent led to situations where helpful actions were punished as severely as harmful ones. The Valdari judges struggled to understand this alien concept of judging actions based on the motivations behind them. Judge Vel-Theron asked how a legal system could function if every case required analysis of the defendant's thoughts and feelings. She argued that such subjectivity would lead to inconsistent decisions and eventual chaos. Commander Thompson was called to testify about military decision-making and the importance of considering circumstances when judging actions. He explained that human military forces trained their officers to evaluate situations quickly and make decisions based on limited information. Context and intent were crucial factors in determining whether an action was appropriate. Jake then presented his most powerful argument. He showed the judges that Sam's action was not actually unauthorized contact with a sacred object, but rather authorized assistance under Valdari hospitality law. He argued that Sam had been invited to help repair their technology and was, therefore, acting with full legal authority. This argument created visible confusion among the judges as they realized that their own laws supported contradictory interpretations of Sam's actions. Prosecutor Neth Valar objected that hospitality law did not override sacred object protection, but Jake countered that the legal code did not specify which law took precedence in such situations. The court erupted into the first spontaneous discussion that had occurred in a Valdari legal proceeding in over 800 years. The judges found themselves debating the relative importance of different laws and questioning assumptions they had never examined before. High Magistrate Zeth Kovar called for order and announced that the court would take an unprecedented recess to consult the ancient legal texts. He said that the questions raised by the human advocate required careful study of legal principles that had not been examined in living memory. As the judges retired to their chambers, Jake felt both hope and fear about what would happen next. He had succeeded in forcing them to confront the logical flaws in their system, but he had no idea whether they were capable of the flexible thinking required to reach a different conclusion. Sam approached his captain during the recess and thanked him for the brilliant defense. The young engineer said he was proud to be defended by someone who was willing to challenge an entire civilization's way of thinking. He told Jake that regardless of the outcome, the trial had already accomplished something important. Dr. Carter observed that several of the younger judges seemed genuinely troubled by the logical contradictions Jake had revealed. She believed that Judge Neil Coven and Judge Rel Thara might be willing to consider new interpretations of their laws if presented with sufficient logical justification. Commander Thompson noted that High Magistrate Zeth Kovar appeared to be struggling with concepts he had never encountered before. The alien leader kept looking at legal texts and shaking his head as if he could not believe what he was reading. This suggested that Jake's arguments were having the desired effect. Prosecutor Neth Valar spent the recess reviewing her case files, clearly concerned that her perfect record of legal victories might be about to end. She had built her entire career on the certainty of Valdari law, and Jake's arguments had introduced uncertainty into what should have been a simple case. As the judges returned to the courtroom after 3 hours of deliberation, Jake could see that something fundamental had changed. Their faces showed confusion and doubt instead of the absolute certainty that had marked Valdari legal proceedings for thousands of years. The trial had become something much larger than a simple criminal case. High Magistrate Zeth Kovar announced that the court had discovered numerous logical inconsistencies in their legal code that required further examination. He said that the judges needed additional time to resolve these contradictions before they could render a decision in Sam's case. The announcement sent shockwaves through Valdari society as news of the unprecedented recess spread throughout their civilization. For the first time in 3,000 years, their perfect legal system had been found to contain flaws that could not be ignored. The human advocate had accomplished what no Valdari had ever dared to attempt. Jake realized that he had already won a victory more important than saving Sam's life. He had forced an entire civilization to question the foundations of their society and consider the possibility that their perfect system was not actually perfect. The real trial was just beginning. The recess stretched into its third day as Valdari legal scholars worked frantically to address the contradictions that Jake Morrison had revealed in their supposedly perfect legal system. Throughout their vast cities, citizens gathered in small groups to discuss the impossible situation that had developed in the Great Hall of Justice. High Magistrate Zeth Kovar had not slept since the trial began as he pored over ancient legal texts with teams of the most brilliant legal minds in Valdari civilization. Every text they examined revealed new contradictions and logical flaws that had been hidden for thousands of years beneath layers of tradition and unquestioned assumptions. Dr. Lisa Carter spent her time documenting the unprecedented social upheaval that was spreading through Valdari society. Citizens who had never questioned anything in their lives were suddenly asking why their laws worked the way they did. The rigid order that had defined their civilization for millennia was beginning to crack under the weight of human logic. Judge Rel Thara, the youngest member of the Circle of Seven, had become the most vocal supporter of examining Jake's arguments more carefully. She argued that truly logical beings should welcome the discovery of flaws in their reasoning rather than defending errors simply because they were traditional. Her position caused heated debates among her fellow judges. Commander Rick Thompson observed that the Valdari military was struggling to maintain order as citizens began questioning not just legal decisions, but all aspects of their strictly regulated society. Soldiers who had followed orders without thinking for their entire lives were suddenly wondering why those orders made sense. The chain of command was showing signs of stress. Jake used the extended recess to prepare an even more comprehensive argument about the nature of justice and the importance of considering intent when judging actions. He realized that he was no longer just defending Sam Rodriguez, but challenging the Valdari to evolve beyond their rigid thinking patterns. The breakthrough came when High Magistrate Zeth Kovar discovered a legal principle from the earliest days of Valdari civilization that had been forgotten for over 2,000 years. The principle of logical completion stated that any legal system must be logically consistent to be considered valid. This ancient law gave Jake the opening he needed, Engineer Sam Rodriguez continued to work with Valdari technicians during the recess, showing them new approaches to problem solving that incorporated flexibility and creative thinking. The Alien. Engineers were amazed by human ability to find innovative solutions to technical challenges that had puzzled them for years. As word of Sam's helpful contributions spread through the technical community, many Valdari began to question whether someone who had done so much good for their society should really be exiled for an accidental touch. The concept of proportional punishment, unknown in their legal system, began to make sense to ordinary citizens. Prosecutor Neth Valor found herself in the impossible position of defending a legal system that she was beginning to realize was fundamentally flawed. Her reputation for logical precision was being challenged by the discovery that the laws she had enforced for centuries contained numerous logical contradictions. The legal scholars working with High Magistrate Zeth Kovar made a stunning discovery when they applied Jake's logical analysis to their entire legal code. They found over 300 situations where different laws contradicted each other, creating impossible choices for citizens who wanted to follow all the rules. Judge Cole Varan, the eldest and most conservative member of the judicial circle, initially resisted accepting that their system contained any flaws. However, when presented with undeniable evidence of logical contradictions, even he was forced to acknowledge that changes might be necessary to preserve the integrity of their legal structure. Dr. Carter was invited to address the full circle of 7 judges about human concepts of justice, mercy, and proportional punishment. She explained that human legal systems had evolved to consider not just what people did, but why they did it, and what consequences would best serve society's interests. The Valdari judges struggled to understand how subjective concepts like mercy could be incorporated into an objective legal system. Judge Niall Coven asked whether allowing such flexibility would eventually lead back to the chaos and warfare that had nearly destroyed their civilization 3,000 years ago. Jake addressed this fear by explaining that considering intent and context did not mean abandoning logical principles. He argued that a truly logical system would weigh all relevant factors before reaching a decision, rather than blindly applying predetermined rules regardless of circumstances. Commander Thompson provided crucial testimony about human military justice systems, explaining how they balance the need for discipline with recognition that good soldiers sometimes had to make difficult decisions in complex situations. He showed that flexibility and order could coexist when properly structured. The turning point came when High Magistrate Zeth Kovar announced that the ancient principle of logical completion required them to resolve the contradictions in their legal system before they could continue functioning as a legitimate court. The law itself demanded that they address the flaws Jake had revealed. Sam Rodriguez was asked to testify about his intentions when he touched the memory crystal. Speaking clearly and honestly, he explained that he had only wanted to help preserve their historical records and had never intended to violate their sacred laws. His sincere desire to help their civilization was obvious to everyone in the courtroom. The impact of Sam's testimony was profound as the Valdari judges encountered genuine altruism for the first time in their lives, the concept that someone would risk personal safety to help strangers challenge their fundamental assumptions about how intelligent beings behaved. Judge Vel Theron asked Jake to explain how human legal systems determined appropriate punishments when intent and circumstances were considered. Jake described concepts like community service, rehabilitation, and restorative justice that focused on repairing harm rather than simply inflicting punishment. The discussion that followed lasted for hours as the judges grappled with ideas that had never existed in their society. They began to see that their system of predetermined punishments might not actually serve justice if it could not distinguish between helpful and harmful actions. High Magistrate Zeth Kovar made the announcement that would change Valdari civilization forever. He declared that the Court of 7 judges would not only decide Sam's case, but would also recommend fundamental reforms to their legal system based on the logical principles Jake had demonstrated. the news spread rapidly through Valdari society, as citizens realized that their legal system was about to undergo the first major changes in 3,000 years. Some were frightened by the prospect of change, while others were excited about the possibility of a more flexible and just society. Prosecutor Neth Valor surprised everyone by announcing that she supported the proposed legal reforms. She said that discovering the flaws in their system had been painful but necessary, and that truly logical beings should welcome improvements to their reasoning processes. Jake realized that he had accomplished something far more significant than saving Sam's life. He had introduced an entire civilization to concepts they had never imagined and started a process of change that would transform their society. The rigid Valdari were learning to think like humans. Dr. Carter observed that younger Valdari were adapting to new ideas much more quickly than their elders. She predicted that within a generation, Valdari society would be completely transformed as new ways of thinking spread through their population. As the court prepared to reconvene for the final phase of the trial, everyone understood that they were about to witness a historic moment. The decision would determine not just Sam's fate, but the future direction of an entire civilization that was learning to question its most basic assumptions. The Great Hall of Justice had become the center of a revolution in thinking that would reshape Valdari society. Jake Morrison, a simple human captain, had accomplished what no Valdari had dared attempt in thousands of years. He had taught them to think beyond the limits of their perfect but flawed system. The Great Hall of Justice had never seen anything like the crowd that gathered for the final day of Sam Rodriguez's trial. Valdari citizens packed every available space, eager to witness the historic decision that would determine the future of their civilization. The air hummed with nervous energy as beings who had lived their entire lives without questioning anything waited to learn if change was truly possible. High Magistrate Zeth Kovar entered the hall with a dignity that seemed somehow different from his earlier appearances. His pale blue face showed signs of exhaustion from days of intense study, but his dark eyes held a new kind of certainty. He had spent 3 sleepless days examining the foundations of Valdari law and had emerged with conclusions that would have been unthinkable just a week earlier. The circle of 7 judges took their positions with unusual solemnity as they prepared to announce decisions that would reshape their entire society. Each judge had struggled with concepts that challenged everything they had believed about law, order, and justice. Their faces reflected the difficulty of abandoning certainties that had guided their lives for centuries. Judge Rel Thara, the youngest member of the circle, spoke first about the logical contradictions that Jake Morrison had revealed in their legal system. She announced that the court had identified over 400 separate instances where different laws created impossible situations for Valdari citizens. The so-called perfect system was riddled with flaws that could no longer be ignored. Jake Morrison stood beside Sam Rodriguez, feeling the weight of history pressing down on him as he waited for the decision that would determine his friend's fate. More importantly, he knew that this moment would decide whether the Valdari could evolve beyond their rigid thinking patterns or would retreat back into the safety of unquestioned tradition. Dr. Lisa Carter watched from the witness area, documenting every detail of this unprecedented event for the historical records that would help humanity understand what had happened on Nexora. She realized that she was witnessing the birth of a new kind of civilization as the Valdari struggled to incorporate human concepts into their ancient society. Commander Rick Thompson observed the security arrangements with professional interest, noting that Valdari guards seemed uncertain about their duties in this unprecedented situation. The rigid military structure that had maintained order for thousands of years was showing signs of flexibility as individual soldiers began questioning their orders. Judge Colvaran, the eldest and most conservative member of the judicial circle, shocked everyone by announcing his support for legal reforms. He said that discovering flaws in their system had been deeply disturbing, but that truly logical beings had no choice but to correct errors in their reasoning once those errors had been identified. High Magistrate Zeth Kovar rose to announce the court's decision regarding Sam Rodriguez's case. His voice carried the authority of thousands of years of legal tradition as he declared that Sam would not be exiled to the moon Cathara. The young human engineer was innocent under a new interpretation of Valdari law that considered intent and circumstances. The announcement sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd as Valdari citizens heard their first verdict of innocence in living memory. Sam Rodriguez had become the first being in Valdari history to be acquitted of a crime after the facts had been established. The impossible had happened in their perfect legal system. But High Magistrate Zeth Kovar was far from finished with his historic announcements. He declared that the Circle of 7 judges had voted unanimously to recommend fundamental reforms to the Valdari legal system based on logical principles that Jake Morrison had demonstrated during the trial. The new legal framework would incorporate human concepts of intent, proportional punishment, and contextual judgment while maintaining the logical rigor that Valdari society valued. Laws would still be based on reason and evidence, but they would consider all relevant factors rather than applying predetermined rules regardless of circumstances. Jake Morrison was invited to address the court about his role in revealing the flaws in their system. Speaking with quiet dignity, he explained that questioning established systems was not an attack on order, but a way of making order more perfect. He said that truly logical beings should welcome the discovery of flaws because it allowed them to create better solutions. High Magistrate Zeth Kovar announced the creation of the Morrison Protocols, a new set of legal principles that would govern how Valdari courts considered intent and circumstances when making decisions. Jake Morrison had become the first non-Valdari ever to have legal principles named in his honor. The reforms would be implemented gradually over the coming years, as Valdari society adapted to new ways of thinking about justice and law. Schools would begin teaching students to question assumptions and consider multiple perspectives when solving problems. The rigid certainty that had defined their civilization for millennia would give way to thoughtful analysis and flexible reasoning. Sam Rodriguez was formally granted the title of Honorary Technician of the Valdari people in recognition of his contributions to their society. His willingness to risk his life to help preserve their historical records had demonstrated the human principle that helping others was worth personal sacrifice. Dr. Carter was asked to establish a new academic program that would teach Valdari students about human psychology, ethics, and decision-making processes. The University of Nexora would create the first department of comparative reasoning to study how different species approached logical problems. Commander Thompson was invited to work with Valdari military leaders to develop new training programs that would teach their soldiers to think creatively and adapt to unexpected situations. The rigid military hierarchy would be modified to allow for initiative and independent judgment at all levels. The changes began immediately as Valdari citizens started questioning other aspects of their society that had never been examined. Artists emerged from underground movements that had been suppressed for centuries, creating music and visual art that expressed ideas and emotions their society had forgotten how to appreciate. Engineers and scientists began approaching technical problems with new flexibility, leading to breakthrough innovations that had been impossible under the old system of rigid thinking. The Valdari technology that had impressed the humans was rapidly surpassed by new designs that incorporated creative problem-solving methods. Jake Morrison was granted the unprecedented title of Logic Bringer and was invited to establish a permanent human embassy on Nexora. The Valdari wanted to continue learning from human approaches to reasoning and problem-solving as they rebuilt their society on more flexible foundations. The transformation spread far beyond the legal system as Valdari. Families began allowing their children to ask questions and explore ideas that had been forbidden for generations. Parents who had never questioned anything in their lives found themselves learning from young Valdari who embraced new ways of thinking with enthusiasm. High Magistrate Zeth Kovar announced the formation of the Terran-Valdari Coalition, a formal alliance between their civilizations based on shared principles of logical reasoning and mutual respect. The partnership would allow both species to learn from each other's strengths and approaches to complex problems. As the historic session concluded, Jake Morrison reflected on what had been accomplished during their visit to Nexora. A simple repair job had led to a legal crisis that had ultimately transformed an entire civilization. The power of human curiosity and willingness to question established systems had proven itself once again. Sam Rodriguez shook hands with Valdari technicians who had become his friends during the crisis, promising to return soon to continue their collaborative projects. The young engineer had unwittingly become the catalyst for the greatest change in Valdari society in 3,000 years. Dr. Carter began planning research projects that would document how the Valdari adapted to their new social structures over the coming decades. The transformation of their rigid society into something more flexible and creative would provide valuable insights into how civilizations could evolve and improve. Commander Thompson worked with Valdari security forces to establish new protocols for the human embassy that would protect both species while allowing for the free exchange of ideas. The military cooperation between their peoples would serve as a model for other interspecies alliances. The crew of the Horizon's Edge prepared to return to Earth with news that would change humanity's understanding of what was possible when different species worked together. They had proven that human values of questioning authority, considering context, and helping others could transform even the most rigid civilizations. As their ship lifted off from Nexora several days later, Jake Morrison looked down at a world that was already changing in visible ways. Construction had begun on new buildings with creative architectural designs that broke free from the geometric patterns that had dominated Valdari cities for millennia. The success on Nexora opened new possibilities for human exploration and diplomacy throughout the galaxy. Other alien civilizations would learn that humans offered not just advanced technology or military power, but new ways of thinking about old problems. The greatest human export would be curiosity itself,